All right, welcome everybody to the third episode of the Accessible Web podcast. We are here today with Accessible Web's accessibility director and outreach coordinator, George Heek, and Karl Horvath from Campus Consortium. So today we're hoping to have a conversation about web accessibility in higher ed. Karl, his bio here. Karl Horvath is a PhD and is a business and technology leader in the education sector, having progressed over a series of executive leadership roles from large public to small private institutions. He is a strategist who resolves problems, completes large-scale projects, develops policy, and creates positive, productive, and diverse organizational work cultures. As a non-traditional student, his career began in a mechanical trade, but pivoted dramatically after discovering higher education in a evening community college class. So, welcome, Karl. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much. Much appreciated, Peter. George, great to be here.
So, I guess to start, why don't you tell us what is Campus Consortium?
Sure, yeah. Campus Consortium is a nonprofit educational technology organization. And the idea of Campus Consortium is it's a national organization, and there are some international members as well. But we try to work with education institutions, mostly higher education, but it also includes K through 12, and that's a growing area for us right now. We really have been getting a lot of school districts that are interested as well in the technologies. But our mission is really to help institutions afford and access technology, either through learning more about it or finding ways to help them fund it. So it's more affordable, and not just initial funding, but long-term funding. So, if you have major systems in your institution, you really need to be able to fund those over the long term for your students, faculty, and staff. We also work on research, thought leadership. We have monthly presentations and a lot of community building events. So that's what we're working on. Our direction has accelerated a little bit due to COVID and the pandemic, of course, that's affected everyone so dramatically. And many educational institutions made dramatic shifts in March of 2020, really had no choice. And some were very prepared and others weren't. So we're there to try to level the playing field for educational institutions and provide support for them. So that's a little bit about Campus Consortium.
So, when you're saying level the playing field, does that mean you're working with mostly small, medium-sized educational groups?
No. We work with institutions. We have relationships with Columbia University, with Cornell University, but we work with small private institutions of, 1,000 or two. We have a few school districts with, 150 students. So it's really all over the board. We support all of education. And, we do have a small in-kind grant program that we offer that's through a few of our partners. And, that's really to get the services to even the schools that are underserved and under-resourced. So a big part of our focus at Campus Consortium is around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I've been doing a lot of work over the years in the digital divide. And, especially recently in the past 3 years in techno-racism has been a large area of study and work for me as well.
Cool. All right. And you and George go way back, don't you?
Yes, we do. We do. George and I. So I've been at a number of educational institutions. I started out as a CIO in for-profit and kind of moved over to nonprofit. I worked at Temple University for a long time, and that's where George and I worked. Has it been 20 years now?
Yeah.
It's been a long time. So George and I both were champions of accessibility. And we were on committees. There was disability resources department there. There was another disability type department there, but I was on both of those, involved in both of them in their events and in their meetings. And I was in IT, so from my perspective, I was trying to provide support for Temple students, for academic technology support, for those with disabilities. So many a time in my office, I would have, say a person who was blind with a seeing eye dog, and they would be sitting in my office, and I'd be showing them some work that we had done in IT to make sure that it was usable, by people that were not sighted. And then that's just one example, but we did many projects along those lines, and Temple University was a very big supporter very long time ago over accessibility. And your company, I talked with you before, really resonate with a lot of work that you did. Hard to believe that I'm sure I'm not an expert like in your area, but I certainly was a champion, as was George back then, for especially like web accessibility, even when the web wasn't as developed or as sophisticated as it was today.
Yeah, and Karl was an early adopter in a way. Not everybody at Temple, faculty, administration, were even aware of the levels of accessibility. And that was before they developed the process of taking accommodations through Disability Services Office, then RUDM. Karl took on a lot of the inquiries directly through his department. And with his support and the support of IT across the board was amazing when we were approaching making accommodations through Blackboard, which was the LMS that they had back then, I believe. We just had support from IT staff. What do you need? And if they didn't know, we'd work together in finding out the answer, and it kind of spread throughout the Temple system. So Karl was a big motivator behind me in how to kind of make it happen in a large enterprise. So I was very fortunate, and we've kept in touch. And basically what I'd like to learn from you in the journey since Temple, and how you have been a champion of accessibility, what have been your challenges, your successes, and some of the best practices that you were able to establish along your famous journey?
Well, it's definitely been a journey, George, and those days, you said large enterprise. That Temple was very big. We had almost, say, about 40,000 people that we worked with, between students, staff, faculty, alumni, you name it, the community. We worked with so many people. And it was a great exercise because of the diversity, and that every day brought a new challenge that we had to deal with. So I think it was certainly baptism by fire for us as far as getting into that, and then dealing with the issues that certainly were nonstop. And I think that challenge was very satisfying there. I think I took a lot of those sensibilities and that collaboration and teamwork that I had with George and others in the area of providing these types of services, that's not everywhere, but I took it with me to wherever I went, and tried to work with the organizations and the institutions to bring more of that in. The issue is when you get to maybe smaller institutions that are not in large urban areas. It's a large urban, institution with lots of different resources. But you get into a lot of smaller institutions, resources get very tight. Funding gets very tight. A lot of smaller schools are tuition dependent, and if enrollment's down, then the budget's down. So it's very difficult to kind of pick up other support and programs when you're just trying to keep the lights on some years or some months or some semesters. So the investments that Temple made into accessibility were admirable, but they can't all be done by every organization to that extent. So my philosophy was going into an organization is that we should try at least to get that sensibility in the organization and get everybody on board. And awareness was one of the first things that didn't really cost anything, but it really made a difference. And so, I kind of took my accessibility and my IT security hat in together to these organizations, because both were not readily funded or even developed in some organizations. It's a nice to have in a way. Can you imagine somebody saying, oh, it's a nice to have for IT security, but we really can't afford it because we just need to have a help desk person, but now you need an IT security person for sure. And I think the same thing, the same sensibility needs to go along with accessibility, because one lesson that I definitely learned at Temple and that George and I have talked about a lot is that accessibility isn't just for a select group of people. It really benefits everyone, right? So it doesn't matter who you are. Accessibility can make systems much more user-friendly for even people that don't have any challenges or issues. So it has very long-term and far-reaching effects when you consider accessibility in your design. So I, would start at an institution and start educating the community. I would educate my team first, so they had an awareness, and we would start talking with students, faculty, and staff. We had gotten requests there as well, just like we did at Temple, from people who needed assistance. And there's been many times where I've had to do case-by-case support. And so I wasn't able to, provide an accessible environment across the board because cost factors are sometimes an issue, because and resource factors. So two of the big resource factors, we talked about funding and money, but another is staff and expertise. And not every medium or small institution has staff and expertise in this area, and there's a lot you can miss, or you can make things worse. So it's important to be informed about how you make changes and how you provide services. But I did have good contacts like George, who was available for consultations over the years, and of course stayed in touch with a lot of the organizational websites and groups. Really made sure that in the institutions we had education programs about accessibility, and we talked to the academic technology departments, for example. We would talk to the technology designers, who created curriculum and content for our learning management systems. And we would say, when this is designed, you really have to have these considerations in mind. If you're creating web content, there's a certain way to code because it's the code behind the scenes that's as important as what you see on the screen. When we talk to faculty who were teaching courses, we wanted to be sure that if they offered videos, they were transcribing the text. They were, PDF documents and other documents that, cannot be accessible to certain student groups or populations. So we really did a lot of training around that. And, a lot of training, believe it or not, is free. You just have to do some research. And in fact, there's extremely helpful guidelines. There are step-by-step user-friendly documents about how to make content systems accessible. So that's really was a lot of my work. Now, fortunately, as after Temple and progressing through some of these institutions, I'm with Campus Consortium now as president and able to direct our area in accessibility and DEI now, which is satisfying. So again, the education component, where I'm able to reach out to our member organizations and to higher education and K through 12s outside of our membership, to really provide this knowledge and information and make connections with organizations like yours, that can really help these schools.
I really love what you said about awareness being free. Like one of the, obviously everyone's constrained by money and budgets and time, but I'd never really, I guess, thought of it that way, where the number one thing, it's not just that it's free, but it sounds like really awareness is probably one of the most important things you can do, because without the awareness, it doesn't matter. You can spend all the money you want on tools, infrastructure, but if no one's aware of what the issue is and why it should matter and what they should be responsible for, no one's going to use those tools to their fullest extent. And so I like the idea of leading with awareness, and on some level, awareness probably goes a lot farther than even the technology, because it's, you need that as the foundation before you start building on top of it.
And,
Yeah.
with Karl, we were able to, Karl asked if we could, the Institute on Disabilities at Temple, if we could put together kind of a general awareness course, like Accessibility 101, that included examples of assistive technology. I believe we did it like every semester, and it really had a big impact, because a lot of times people were not aware of assistive technology and how that provides access to information. And it was this cooperation from Temple IT, the faculty, not just the faculty, but the educational technologists, the instructional designers, it gradually, slowly created a community that, hey, we know where to get the answer. I might not know how to make an accessible PDF, but that guy from the Institute mentioned something about, and the community, it wasn't perfect, but Temple didn't become accessible overnight, but it went pretty far, and at least people were learning what it was about. And then guidelines, that people were getting federal funding through grants, they at least had to be Section 508. So it kind of gradually grew in that direction. So awareness was a really big, a key thing in accessibility at Temple, and went a long way.
You too, Karl, you kind of said in your opening statement there, talking about IT purchasing, and this is not a one-time purchase. And, you kind of framed it as IT investment, helping people understand it's not a one-time thing. And we're going through that in the state of Vermont right now, where the government's trying to set up some ongoing funding mechanisms for these different IT systems instead of just one and done. The legislature passes a bill, and I imagine it's the same in higher ed, where maybe you have a good year, and in the 2021 budget there's room for new assistive technology. But I guess a big part of what we try to instill in all our clients is that this isn't a one and done. This is something where you need to lay a foundation in your organization so that everyone's pushing forward, and then it's an ongoing journey. The earlier you can get to it, the better, and then the more you can be thinking about it, I guess, really every day, on an ongoing basis. It's just going to be that much better. You can't just buy some systems once and expect that to solve the problem. You really need to intentionally implement those systems and have feedback loops so that they're being used to the best of their ability and really providing the greatest value to those community members with disabilities that might be relying on them.
Yeah, I think that's very, very important. And as George said, there was a Accessibility 101, and it is really creating a two-way communication between the community and what our mission was, which was really to try to get the word out, increase the awareness, and really make change. I mean, that's our ultimate goals. We want to make change. And in some of my institutions, I did conduct surveys and training sessions as well. Again, didn't cost any money to go out and talk to the department, an academic department, or talk to the academic technology department, so we can explain these principles to them. But there's also the cases that I've worked several times with legal counsel in institutions as well, because that is also another aspect of this. While we do try to get the word out, there are others on the outside and sometimes on the inside that are also troubled by the lack of accessibility in a particular environment or organization or an institution. And so those issues can be raised either through a simple request, or in another method, which would be, perhaps some kind of legal action. We also have agencies, government agencies, that are concerned about these issues and champion citizens in this regard. So I think that as stewards of technology, that we really need to have this awareness beyond just being able to fix code or fix something when it's broken, is really improve it and proactively improve it. So when these issues come up, and they will, I mean, it's like, is there 100% IT security? Absolutely not. You could have a complete IT security team with a chief information security officer. You can be members of all the leading organizations for IT security. You will never be 100% secure. You'll be 99 maybe if you're lucky. But we can see from very large organizations that have a lot of money, they still have security breaches. And it's the same for accessibility, right? So are we always going to be 100% accessible? No, there's always going to be probably some issue. We made an effort, George and I made an effort at Temple. I think we came a long way there. Is it 100%? Is it ever going to be 100%? Hopefully it's close most of the time, but it is really, accessibility is mindfulness, and it's a practice, like meditation. You really have to keep with it at all times, keep it on top of your mind, make it part of your work habits, your thought processes. I had a meeting recently about diversity with a group of diversity experts, and we were discussing fundamental issues around this area, and of course now it's become very it's in the news, and it's a big topic. But the one topic that came up, the one question that came up was, somebody said, well, we were talking about equity, and the one person said, well, if we put as much effort now into diversity and equity issues as we do with IT security, because IT security is a hot topic. Companies spend tons of money on educating those inside the organizations, inside the institutions, so they can protect themselves from their own people, right? Because people click on something in an institution, and there goes an issue that you have to deal with, a cybersecurity issue. But it's the same thing if we put that same energy into accessibility, into diversity, equity, and inclusion issues. Then I think it would affect people as much as IT security does. Because we are marginalizing groups of people. We are preventing the fair distribution of content and systems and services to people that just cannot get to them. And so our work is to try to, again, I used the phrase before, level the playing field.
Now, Karl, with that said, how do you think what should we do to help develop the processes of developing good programmers, or have this taught? We've talked to a lot of young developers, and I think about 95% of them have said, we haven't really been taught about this, or someone did a presentation in one class and that was it. Even we have junior developers have gone through certificate programs and more has been taught in the certificate program than a 4-year bachelor's program in computer science. What do you think would be a good move to make that part of curriculum change to help develop good coders, accessible coders?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think that touches on my earlier comment about techno-racism. And you know, there's a great book by a professor of African American Studies at Princeton that came out a few years ago that really kind of addresses some of the issues you're talking about. But you know, one of the issues, if you read through this book, which is really informative and gives great suggestions on how to tackle some of these issues, is you know, the idea of, you know, we talked about awareness, right, and culture change. You know, if we shift this over for a moment to business, everybody knows what business is, right? Everybody today you hear, oh, everybody's getting a business degree, right? Everybody gets a business degree. All right, so a lot of people are getting business degrees, but how good are they at business? And then the other thing in business is leadership and management, right? So you take a couple management and leadership courses, and how much of that content is really instilled into business majors that graduate and then take positions in companies. Now, I'm sure everybody has had experience with a manager or a leader that, you know, you can't believe you're having this experience because it's not a positive one. And you would think that, you know, Leadership 101 in business school would be something that they should not be doing. But the fact is that that happens all the time. How many people do you hear about today that went to business school, took leadership and management classes, and they're not performing as expected in their organization? Same thing with developers, right? So developers are taught to code, software engineers are taught to design systems and applications. And how much of these types of courses are we teaching in terms of accessibility and usability, right? I want to take an elective in my computer science class. What's a fun course to take? Oh, that usability course is an easy A. Let's take that. Are you taking it seriously or not, right? I think that the perspective of the programs have to create a great emphasis on this. I think organizations that have in-house developers and engineers really need to, make it a priority as part of work projects that accessibility and usability are considered in the development process. If you look at the Techno-Racism book and you read a little bit about, how were programs and applications developed historically. So if we think of legacy applications that were programmed by a very small demographic, typically because the gender and race of that demographic designed all those applications, and they used their experiences, and this was before awareness maybe, so that was really infused in a lot of the applications that emerged over the decades, and some are still in use today, and they're very centric to those types of users. So if we had been able to go back in time and retrain the legacy developers and programmers to ask them to consider this, they probably would have approached developing this software from a less centric perspective and more inclusive, and consider the larger population. That's one area, and we see these issues in something like facial recognition software. Facial recognition software is used by law enforcement often, and I'm sure you've read the stories recently, past few months about someone who was African American was profiled wrongly and then sent to prison, and then they realized it was not that person, and they were sent based on the facial recognition software. When they went back and kind of looked at the software and how the percentages of people that were identified due to the software. They found that it was a certain race, a certain demographic. And so a lot of police enforcement is kind of backing off on using those until that software is kind of redeveloped to be more inclusive. You know, there were certain races that were not targeted as much. And you can just do the numbers and say, oh, here's all the profiles. This is a huge number. This is a small number. I wonder why, you know? So, and that may have been purely unintentional, right? Because maybe you just use certain subjects and measure certain subjects a certain way. And that's why. But again, if you go back to the beginning and you develop it with a more open mind, then your end result is more inclusive. So those are just a couple ideas, I think, in terms of your institutions and your organizations. I think that again, this all has to come from executive leadership. It has to be from the top down, and I mean the very top down. You know, I see so many boards, you know, boards of directors, boards of trustees, and they're very focused on certain projects, you know, that are appealing and interesting, and certainly they help those projects and initiatives help the institution. But and then there is some compliance talk, almost as if it's a nuisance in some cases. But we have to remember we're talking about people, and that our population is grown, and that we have so many different people, and we can't design just for a segment of the population. We have to design for everybody. It's the same thing in the institutions where these awareness and education programs really will help to make a difference, but it has to be made a priority by management, right? By the leaders. It has to be written down as something that we have to accomplish. As much as we have to accomplish these other items, we have to you know, do the same with accessibility.
It's really interesting too, just generationally, because obviously the young people, I would say, are really driving a lot of this diversity,
Yeah.
equity, and inclusion, and they just intuitively get it. And you know, you don't find yourself often trying to talk to or explaining to a young person, at least the ones in our circles, I guess I'd say, that that you know, they shouldn't say all lives matter instead of Black Lives Matter, right? But then Uncle Bob at Thanksgiving just can't seem to wrap his head around the difference between those two things, and why, you know, maybe all lives matters isn't the most appropriate thing. It's not necessarily wrong. Yes, we agree, Uncle Bob, that all lives do matter, but you know, there's just this, I don't know, it's generational. I think it's how they, you know, how they grew up. And you know, certainly when we're hiring employees, when we're looking for team members, we're looking as much at their personalities and kind of those traits that we can't teach. You know, are they going to show up on time? Are they going to be a good team member? They have a good sense of humor? Are they going to be able to work collaboratively and take feedback? And you know, do they have this level of empathy? Do they really want to do it for the right reason? And that's really kind of, do they want to do this? Are they excited about our company for the right reason? That's kind of the key question. And we've got some awesome team members that have joined that are really, really passionate about this. And, you know, like, I think some people just get it, and others, you know, need to be trained. And certainly all of us, we're trained in one way or another, whether it's just by our environment and the people we surround ourselves with. You know, I always think maybe people are kind of the sum product of the 10 people they spend the most time around. And so anyway, on kind of the, like, you know, how do you get developers to get into this, is we've done conferences and stuff. We often hear that, and kind of to my surprise, it's this lower layer of developers and maybe this younger layer of developers that are coming into an organization, and they're really frustrated with the board of directors at the top, or their, you know, C-level executives at the top that don't get it, that just, you know, are focused on the more traditional metrics and KPIs and, you know, like you said, the flashy projects.
Right.
And they're not, you know, they just don't really see the value in something that's maybe not measurable or not clearly gonna, you know, add another $100,000 to the bottom line at the end of the year. So I don't know. It's interesting because I think it's certainly, as someone goes through a computer science course, this is something that we need to introduce them to. And from my own perspective, I think I'm a pretty empathetic person, and throughout school and stuff, I did a lot of work with the kids with disabilities and working with them during study halls and stuff, just as a break from my normal studies. And so, but I never knew about web accessibility. So it's until 2016, as embarrassing as it is, it hadn't occurred to me. It wasn't something I'd ever thought about, just because I was focused in on building websites and building a business and learning technology, and it hadn't ever shown up. So yeah, I think you've got to make sure that people, kids in college, or people that are taking code camps or whatever, are getting into technology. We certainly need to make sure they're aware of this. Number one, I guess this is all circling back to awareness as the foundation. Make sure they're aware of it, and I guess I would expect that the people that are made aware of it, that if you couple that with just their generation or their overall perspective about society and community and equality, diversity, inclusion, they're just going to kind of get it and run with it. And then hopefully this is obviously it would be awesome if everything could change tomorrow and everyone would embrace this, but certainly it's very hopeful to me that and that's why we're running this business. Let's get more people involved, let's get more people pushing forward and understanding this is an issue and how to deal with it. And then over time, the hope is that it just kind of snowballs, and at some point it's just best practices, and it's something that we're all doing when we're writing code and building websites and IT tools.
Well, yeah, I mean, if let's think about the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Let's think about Brown versus Board of Education in 1954. I mean, these were big deals in the government, so why are we, fast forward all these years, why is this an issue now? Yeah. So I think that, it's like the author, I think it's John Maxwell, said it's great that if you have good intentions, right? So it's great to know about these things, but you want to do intentional living, right? So that means you want to make that, turn those good intentions into intentional ways of acting every day, and try to do something about it. And, I think that's, it's great that the government made these laws. In fact, there's one right now that is, I believe, I'm not 100% sure if it's out there, but the Digital Equity Act of 2021. Did you hear about that? That Digital Equity Act, that's a new one, working on that for inclusion, and that there's some activity around that. But in terms of developers, engineers, it's not just the creators, but it's the implementers, it's the supporters, it's the maintainers, it's the users. I mean, we all really need to be an educated population. So I would really encourage you to, I think the professor's name is Ruha Benjamin from Princeton, also about the techno-racism book, because a lot of these issues are kind of addressed in that, and about, I think the book's called Race After Technology. But it's, just kind of insightful to think about these things that, we're not trying, we're not intentionally trying to leave anybody out. Like you said, just learn about accessibility recently. It's just like, well, why hasn't this been a thing? Well, it hasn't been in our world, right? Like we've been allowed in a way to kind of circulate and live for a certain amount of years without having this awareness, but it is important. And it is something that everybody has to really should be championing, to a certain extent.
Yeah, and I'm happy and excited that the WCAG guidelines will most likely be folded into the ADA within probably the next 2 years. But that's not going to be a complete answer or solution. Awareness is going to be a big part of it. Community outreach, and when that gets together, I think it'll be more part of everyday life and development and management from top down. and I totally agree with you. The laws aren't going to solve it by themselves, but it has to be a cohesive approach from everybody, from marketing to the users understanding where can they give feedback, because with
Right.
with internet and TV coming into one conduit of information, I think we're seeing more awareness. You can see it in mainstream advertisement. You see a few more people. Well, you see a lot more diversity, but you're starting to see people with various disabilities as part of
Yeah.
mainstream advertising. So I think we have a good start.
Absolutely. And, the more that we get the word out there, we just talked about the Digital Equity Act. I mean, it's really been around, but now it's getting a resurgence. That kind of embeds it in our mainstream. But I think one of the biggest concerns about a lot of organizations, I mean, we're all freely discussing it and we're advocates here, but, if you look at it, if you flip it back to the business side, and you're trying to make sure your organization or your business survives. I mean, I'm just going to talk about the education sector, since I know a little bit about that, in terms of, think about a school who their enrollment has dropped hundreds of students due to the COVID and the pandemic. And already before this, it was starting to drop off because the traditional student demographic has been shrinking over the years, and so institutions have had to look for other sources of students. The funding isn't there. Everything's getting more expensive. These institutions are struggling to survive, and then you ask them to implement an accessibility program. So that's why, I think that we really need to talk, certainly there's value in the work that services and consultants can provide, but there's also other information that's freely available and resources. But it really does take initiative, to live this kind of idea mindfully. Because you really are helping. It's a way to help more people.
So, Karl, I mean, I'm a educational institution. I haven't really thought much about digital inclusion, and where do I start? Do you have any best practices or recommendations?
Yeah, so I've been at a few where it was not even on the radar, and so again, it's a trusted resource. So usually institutions go to other institutions for assistance and support sometimes, and that is a big difference between sectors. You look at the for-profit sector businesses; they're a lot more competitive and guard their information a bit more. But the one thing I liked about working, especially in higher education, was the collaboration and the freely offering each other. I've had so many schools come to my school and say, "This is how we did this project. We'll show you, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel." And I think that's part of what Campus Consortium is about, is to make those connections so people don't have to start from scratch. And so they create the right thing from the beginning. So I think that, a good first step practice, not just for schools and institutions, but for any organization, is to look to somebody else who's been successful in this area. Many years ago, when George and I were at Temple, there probably wasn't as much information out there that's available, and today that's completely different. But it's amazing how much people don't know, even though we live in the information age. It's amazing how much that people don't access or research about topics, because it does all take time, and when we all have to live, there's so much information to consume. But I think on something like this, it's number one, working with doing some research. Number two, I mentioned legal department before. A lot of times legal departments have this as part of their compliance, and another department to work with like George and I worked with at Temple, or disability services or disability resources departments, they're going to have an awareness about this. In fact, they may not even really know much about web accessibility, for example, and they may be very concerned with how do we accommodate a student because this building was built in 1932 and it doesn't have a ramp, but they may not be 100% aware or thinking of how do we make the website available so they can get to the website from home or from a screen reader. So it's just making these connections, and this is all free stuff. It's social research when you think about it, and just by making these few connections and having discussions, I think schools start sensibility, a kind of a culture of awareness, and it really impacts the organizational culture as a whole, because these discussions, as small as they are, begin to build that awareness. And when something happens, and ultimately a lot of times it does happen, where there is a disability resources request, or you get a letter from the Office of Civil Rights, or some other issue occurs, then you're ready to deal with it because you've already had these discussions. You have this awareness about it, and in fact, I think that really helps because it's a good faith effort. We want to make good faith efforts. That doesn't mean we have to solve everything. And again, like, where do you start? You said that's a great question, because I think there's a lot of concern over, oh my gosh, if I look at this, it's going to cost me a fortune, and that's not true. I mean, I mean, it is true. It can be true, certainly. But I think that first step is the most important step and the most impactful step than any amount of money that you would spend on solving the entire problem, is to begin that awareness, perpetuate education programs, and support committees or groups. And you don't have to be an expert to create these. Mm-hmm. You bring school, college, university, or a K through 12. It's a few interested staff members or faculty members, along with the school resource person, or your Title IX coordinator, or anybody who has interest in this topic. The way that you start building the sensibility in the community is start to have these discussions, and then you become that group that leads the institution into a better place, I think.
Awesome. Great answer. All right. Well, we're approaching the end of time here, and we've got to do a little bit of housekeeping. So we've been giving away T-shirts. We've been doing drawings for our followers on Facebook and LinkedIn. So visit us at Facebook. You can just look up Accessible Web on Facebook or LinkedIn and should be able to find us pretty easily. So today, our winner from our Facebook followers is Lizzie Williams. Right. So congratulations, Lizzie. And on LinkedIn, our winner is Becca King. So if you are not following us on social media, do it, because you could have an opportunity to win an amazing T-shirt. Carl's been raving about our Accessible Web logo.
I have.
So
when I saw that hat, I signed up on all social media. Yeah. So yeah. Cool. Yep. I'm in there. Yeah.
So thank you, Karl, so much.
You do good work too, Peter. I'm sorry, and George. You guys do a great job. So that too. But the hat really makes that clinched it for me.
Awesome. Awesome.
Well, T-shirt's heading your way anyway.
Thank you.
So yeah, we really appreciate the time today.
It was a great conversation. I love talking about these things. I think it's we don't want to approach this in a threatening way. Sure. We want to do it in an informative way and supportive, and that's really what it's all about. So I just encourage everybody to, people that you work with, I hope they're reaching out to you and just making the inquiry. How do I get started? What can I do? Everybody can do something, even if it's in a small way. And I appreciate you inviting me on to talk about that. And you're doing a great thing, and I really enjoyed myself.
Yeah, and that's been my favorite part, is just kind of get started. Everyone out there who's thinking about doing this, don't be don't be overwhelmed. There's plenty of resources and people that want to help. You just got to start the conversation and get the ball rolling.
Right.
As always, Carl, always good talking with you.
All right, great. Thank you, George. Thank you, Peter. Thanks to the audience who attended and all the audiences you have. And I'll be talking to you soon, I'm sure.
All right. Later, gentlemen.
All right.